Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 4 in our scenario playthrough series. This is Diamond Heights. We're going to tackle this one like we've done with the others, with a kind of more realistic play style, trying to bring in some of the things that I've learned in real life as a real life theme park designer. This one's got a different goal than the other ones have had. This one requires $200,000 in park value by the end of year 3, so it's not an attendance-based goal. We've got a pretty good park to start with already, which is really going to help us out, although I'm not totally satisfied with a number of the things in the park, so we're going to make a bunch of modifications to it over time. One of the things being the train. I really don't like the huge hills that the thing has all the way around. I tend to avoid hills on both trains and monorails as best as possible because you just don't really see that terribly often. We're also going to modify the Red Junior coaster here, as well as the log flume at some point throughout the whole thing. We've got a decent amount of rides and stuff to start with, although a lot of them have already been built, so we need to do a little bit of research here to get going as far as things to add in. I also will go ahead and add in the food stalls and the restrooms and the info kiosk because there's none of them right now. As far as build spacing go, we're looking here at a couple of the spaces where we could stick larger coasters here a little later on without having to interact with too many other things. But they're not really anywhere close to the main pathway. So this is really the first one where we don't really have suitable build spaces and we don't really have a lot of area to work with as far as flat land to build stuff on. So it's definitely a step up as far as challenge goes, but we'll still handle it. So we're going to start here with a little bit of a plaza up front. It's kind of weird that you come in and you immediately have the queue for the railroad on the one side there. So I want to give a little bit of kind of decompression zone right when you get into the park. So we're going to add that little plaza with the statue, put some topiaries and stuff up there here eventually, and then we're going to move that train station a little further down so we can get rid of those hills on either side to really help smooth that out a little bit. This queue for the log flume as well goes over the pathway, and that is kind of a neat interactive element, but at the same time, I feel like you've got this great vista looking down into the valley, and you've kind of ruined it with the queue coming across. So we're going to end up moving that whole thing and actually just wholesale reworking that log flume here a little bit coming forward, spoiler alert. But, you know, our first big modification is moving this railroad, and you can play a drinking game on this video with how many times we're going to close the railroad during this scenario playthrough, and it is a lot. Because this railroad definitely needs some help, and we're going to modify it in little bits and pieces as we go. But this first one is going to eliminate this big hill climb that we've got. I don't really advocate tunnels, and you will know that if you've watched some of my other videos, but at the same time, I more so advocate that than I do about giant hills for each of the vehicles for this one. So we're going to go ahead and stick it through a big tunnel, do some landscape modification. Because of the general kind of unsuitable landscape in this park, we're going to have to do a lot of landscape modification. And in general, I try and keep things relatively fixed to the existing landscape as best as I can. But in some cases, you just can't. So that's what we're going to deal with in this one as well. But here we are building our little bridge and queue as well, getting rid of that queue up there. So now we have a nice little entry space here. We'll look at cleaning that up here a little bit, adding some more stuff. But first, we want to add in a couple of more rides just to get the guests coming through. This is a pay per ride scenario, or at least that's how it's set up, and we're going to keep it that way, which is just fine. Go ahead and modify this little section here to lower some of this stuff so we don't have just a lot of up and down as we go through the whole space. So that's, I think, one of the key things as far as that goes. We're also going to adjust all of the pricing for this whole park because it really needs that since all the coasters are very cheap. So that way we can start to get some funds rolling in. We'll drop in a couple of topiaries here, diamonds obviously because Diamond Heights, and a couple of the hedge fencing, which is kind of one of my favorite fences to use. It just has a nice little natural look, but we still have a nice visual blocker there. Back to the swinging ship, we're going to go ahead and do what we've done in the previous ones and raise up the land so that we don't have those kind of ugly supports underneath, and we'll do a little bit of jagged landscaping around it with some bushes and some bulrushes to blend in the space a little bit with the surroundings, give it a more rustic look, and then use these post and mesh fencing, which I feel like has also that kind of rustic look to it. So we're going to stick with that throughout, as well as using the wood land sides for a little bit of that as well. I'm going to do the same thing with the queue right here, just to make it kind of almost a dock on the side. Since we don't have the pirate theming to do anything with, we're just going to use our generic theming to just give it a little bit of a vibe, which I think works pretty well as far as that goes. By the way, this video is the first one that we're doing at 4 times speed rather than 6 times speed, so I had a couple of comments on previous videos that the other ones were too fast. I know I don't really pay much attention to how well we move around with the cursor, so hopefully the 4 times is a little bit better, and we're going to split this park into 2 videos as well, so please let me know what you think, because I'm always open for some feedback. So we're looking up here at what we can stick in this area, and I think I want to do a car ride, just because we probably need another ride here right up front before you get too far into the park, because you got a long way to walk to get to that coaster, and all you have beforehand is either the train or the log flume, so I think it makes more sense to put something else in there. We've got kind of a weird mishmash of pathways, and just it's all a one big dead end, so I want to make some loops, and before we get into that car ride, we're going to start to build out this little island here by adding a scrambler. This island will be sort of the head start for making a big loop around that will eventually connect back to the log flume. And what I really want to make sure we do is create those pathway loops. And in general, I like doing that with pathways just because it means there is no dead end, and there's 2 ways to get to something, and the guest probably will not have to walk quite as far depending on where they are to get to something. So we're going to drop in and do a little bit of theming on that scrambler just to get it going and get it headed in the right direction. So now we're back over here, and we got to figure out how we want to do a car ride. I've typically done car rides on flat ground, and I usually don't take advantage of the elevation changes that they can have, and I feel like that's often a miss. Like, I don't find myself to be very good at doing car rides, so we're going to practice here a little bit with something potentially a little more interesting, with some hills and other stuff going on. You know, in general, realistically, you don't typically see car rides that are up off the ground on stilts or supports and things, so that's why I typically keep it on the ground. But we've got such a terrain here that I really do want to take advantage of that as best as we can, and this isn't going to be a terribly long ride, but we are going to go ahead and fit this into the existing space here using this flat bit on top for the station. 2 you know, tunnels, one's longer than the other, but I think it's just going to be fine. I'm not too worried about that. With this map, you kind of have to get over it with the tunnels, just because there's really not a lot of opportunity to not use tunnels, especially for the train and other things. So we're going to embrace it as far as this goes. I guess this park has deep pockets to do tunnels, because you just don't really see them in real life typically, at least underground ones. We'll make another little plaza here, put a fountain in there, and of course do a little bit of theming for the whole thing. I tend to use the sports cars here pretty early on, because, or at least on my first car ride within a scenario, only because they seat 2, so I'm effectively doubling my capacity to the racing cars, and I just like them better than the trucks for sure. I feel like it's just more of a natural vibe to it. We're going ahead and doing a lot of the wood sidewalls here. I tend to go a little overboard on these sometimes, where if I do one, I kind of feel like I got to do the rest. But you know, in this instance, I think it looks pretty good, and I just don't like kind of open dirt sidewalls. It's like, well, what's holding it back? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we're gonna put the wood here around, helps carry the theme throughout as well. Drop a couple of flowers around that plaza, and just try and make it look pretty nice in general. I think the ride turned out pretty decent, but now we're going to turn our attention to creating our first pathway loop. So now we can go either over the dueling coasters or around them, and this is a good spot right here to stick our haunted house. I've done this in the previous couple of ones by sticking them kind of off on the side a little bit buried within the forest. We'll do a little windy queue right here and drop in a whole bunch more trees and a little bit of landscaping here with the rock texture to kind of hide the base of it, kind of make it feel a little bit more mysterious and hidden back there, drop in some bushes. These little quarter tile conifers are super useful as far as that goes, so we'll throw those all throughout. Can't ignore doing land texture changes as well, and then what I would just call the spooky fence, because I feel like that's the fence that's most conducive to that kind of a look and theme, so we're going to stick with that throughout. We've got a lot of throw up here, which is never good. This is something we're going to battle all scenario. I usually don't put down the fixed positions for handyman just because I'm kind of lazy about it, but in this one we're going to have to at some point, and I really probably need to pay more attention to that in the future. But for now we'll just take care of the one section that needs it. But now we're going to look at the boat hire. We got a lot of water here, so it makes sense to do a boat hire, and we also have a couple of different types of boats. So we're going to do the bumper boats and the rowboats. So I would typically put this horizontally along that kind of riverwalk area there, but instead one of the suggestions in chat was to do this on a dock, which I thought was kind of a neat idea. It's a shame that you can't rotate the entrance huts without cheats, because I feel like that would be a little nicer, because it would take up just a little bit less space and just feel more space efficient in general. So, but it is what it is, since this is how we're going to play this one. So that's what we're doing right now. One of the challenges that I found as we went through the rest of the scenario here is that a lot of the boats got stuck, and not just trying to get in or out of the actual station platform. The boat, or the bumper boats, would go kind of halfway across the map and just get stuck over there for some reason. Not really sure why, but it is what it is, so we had to keep resetting those as far as that goes. Okay, so now we have put down a couple of regular flat rides and things just to generate some income. So now we're going to modify arachnophobia. I know this is similar to the Diamond Heights, where a little bit of sacrilege by modifying one of the existing kind of iconic coasters, but you know, for me that's okay. Railroad closure number 2 right there, as we remove the spiral lift and put in a straight lift hill. This coaster has vibes of a Tivoli custom layout from Zero, like you see in the malls in a lot of places. I really liked that model type, and it just kind of meanders and goes around, so that's what I wanted to do in this instance, and also get it up off the water, because I really don't like how it sits on the water. And really, in general, I don't like coasters that touch the land or touch the water in any one point, so I always tend to bring them up off of it, at least by one. I'm going to go ahead and interact with this trestle just a little bit, because I feel like it's a good opportunity to do a little bit more on that side, just because otherwise it's kind of wasted space. So we're going to try and meander around here and utilize the terrain just a little bit. We have the coaster currently running into that queue for the log flume, which I mentioned earlier we were going to adjust anyways, but this is a really good impetus to do that, so we're going to go ahead and temporarily move this to the other side, which is fine. Thankfully it actually works pretty well to tie it in there, but this will hold us off until we modify the whole darn thing a little later on. So we've got ourselves a nice moved queue, and now we can have this great drop over top of the log flume drop, as well as over top of the ride after it splashes down, so create some good interactivity there. I tend to build backwards when I do coasters to add a brake run before I go too far into the layout, just so that I have an idea about how long the brake run is going to be, and I can put it in the right spot so I don't end up running into anything else in particular. Part of the challenge of this one was trying to figure out where it goes from here. I have this kind of nice dive down and around, but I wanted to do a little bit more for it as we go along. So one of the things that I was thinking about here is, you know, could we go back underneath the log flume, or what do we do? Perhaps we go diagonally across, which is what we're going to end up doing at one point. Clearance is kind of an issue here, as far as we can't just do one big drop down, because we have the other diagonal drop coming through. So one of the suggestions in chat was to do a double down, which not terribly Zero-esque as far as this goes, but it's close enough that I think we can buy it. And I'm also going to kind of kill two birds with one stone here by raising this whole bridge up, and we're going to have less of that pathway coming down the hill than we would have otherwise. One of my goals of the scenario was to get rid of a lot of those really long, steep pathways like that. Typically my max is 2 before I want to have a landing in there, just because you just really don't see it in real life with just gigantic endless stairs or ramps and things like that. You got to think a little bit about accessibility as far as that goes. I wanted to wrap the other hill right here one more time, but we just didn't have the pace to do it, so we're going to turn right back into the brakes. It means it will be a shorter layout than it was previously, and we don't quite have the same amount of height as we did with the spiral lift, but that's okay. I'm happier with the layout. It's a little more realistic, perhaps. We do have the station on the ground here, which is okay. The zero track in particular, the way that the upstop wheels interact with the zero track kind of keeps it above the bottom of the track to begin with. So this is one of the few coaster types where I'm kind of okay with having the coaster track on the ground. I feel like it's more, I don't want to say permissible, but at least from a realistic standpoint, I feel like it's a little better as far as that goes. We'll move the queue and we'll move the entrance to the other side of the station platform just because I think that looks better on a coaster, just to have entry on one side and exit on the other. We'll have our block brakes there so we can run 2 trains with the longer train as well, rather than the multiple short trains. Obviously one of the things we're having to do here is transition from continuous circuit mode to continuous circuit block section. So we won't have quite the same capacity with those bunch of little tiny trains, but we'll do okay as far as this goes. So now moving over to our next bit, we'll want to do kind of our first original big coaster, and to do that, we're going to find a good space for it, and I think over here on this hill is going to be the right one. So talking through on stream just kind of how to build this, a lot of times I think about building on the kind of key feature first and then going forwards and backwards around it, so that way I'm not having to worry about where I place the station to get it to line up with where I want the key feature to be. So thinking through this, we've got this really specific terrain, and I feel like this drop ought to go down the terrain a little bit, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to do somewhat of a blend here, a little bit of a CCI-esque coaster, since we can't do the steep drops or really a lot of the things that will be more characteristic of a GCI with this type of coaster train, or end track, I guess. That's more of the wooden twister coaster from RCT1. We're going to do this little bit of a terrain following thing, kind of like a Boulder Dash almost, with a little bit of a Raven from Holiday World-esque layout in there. So we've got this double down after you cross underneath of the lift hill, cruise over top of the water here, have a little bit of a flat section there. And then I'm going to do a turnaround here on the far end that's a lot more similar, or a lot similar to Raven at Holiday World, where it kind of dives down and has this nice curve over top of the water really closely. Again, our train is in the way, so we're going to have to move that. So this will be number 3 closure, if you're keeping track. As far as that goes, we also need to hire some more handymen just to make sure everything's getting fixed in time, because we were having some troubles with that. It's one of the hard parts with a big park, and also a confusing park layout as far as that goes. And not even confusing, just not optimized. So we'll go ahead and change out this little bit of a train layout right now. We're going to temporarily put in that section, and that'll get moved a little later here as we go along. Got this nice diagonal dive into a water skimming drop here, and then kind of line ourselves up to be right alongside the outrun with the return run. I figure we can make use of this train track as well and do a nice little dive down below. I think this would be a cool view as you go down through and duck underneath. Always look for some interaction as well when you can, and make sure it's not as forced as it needs to be. Train interaction is super easy because train track in general is pretty cheap, so it's not too bad to go ahead and make that work. If we're going to modify it, we might as well modify it to benefit us. So we've got the 2 curves there that kind of line up with each other, and now I want to cross over this drop and try and bring it home. So we get a little bit of kind of gymnastics to do here to get everything back to where we want it to do. There's not really a suitable space for the station, so we're just going to stick it out here on this peninsula and then try and cross over ourselves, and then do this quick little tunnel, turn into the brakes, and we will do that right here. And that gives us a nice little brake area, and then we can put our entrance and exit through in a photo booth there, or a photo piece there as well, just to generate us a little bit of extra revenue as far as that goes as well. So drop in our entrance and our exit, and I think that works pretty well for our first coaster. Takes up a fair bit of room, but at the same time, I think it fits well, and uses the terrain, which is one of the kind of key things I wanted to do with this park. So thinking through pathway, we really need to connect this in two spots. We already started the one connection point over by the scrambler, and I want to connect it back over to the log flume, which is eventually going to force me to redo the log flume as well, and probably close and redo the train again, because the train just needs to keep getting closed. I guess that's part of it. So we will bring the pathway across. There's really no suitable way to do this, but we're going to make it as on land as possible. Then we'll come up here to a little plaza on top of the wooden coaster tunnel. Pull away a little bit of the landscape to do so, and then come down for our brakes. But I feel like this looks okay. We can also lower a section here so we can bring the pathway to the other side, get our queue in here. I thought the queue would be kind of nice to meander around with a couple of little dips and climbs, kind of reflecting the main path that kind of goes all over the place in this map. Put our fencing in here because fencing really makes a difference as far as the look goes for a lot of these things, and also go ahead and use the wood sidewalls for that section too. So now we've at least connected it, we've got it open so we can run it, which is good news. And now we need to connect to the other side of the space, but like I said before, the log flume is kind of in the way. You know, we can work around it, but it's just not quite the best spot for it, so there's really a lot that we need to do with that. But before we get there, let's go ahead and drop in a couple of the pathway stuff. Marcel just did a nice video on what all the pathway stuff does. You should check that out on Marcel Voss's channel. A couple of new things that I learned, not too much there, but put the pathway benches and the trash cans and everything, and now we're going to get into it. It's time to modify this log flume. Kind of got an iconic start with that big drop right out of the station, but at the same time, I don't really like the anticlimactic nature of you start out with the big drop and then you kind of cruise around and you slowly climb back to the station. It feels sort of anticlimactic when you get into the whole thing. So we're going to do something a little bit different, and it'll still start with a drop, but it's not going to go entirely through the large drop first. So we're still going to end with the large drop, at least kind of close by as far as that goes. We're going to check some of our interactive stuff, or our operations here just a little bit before we get into that, just to kind of clean this up from a park balance standpoint as well. Just kind of look at everything. There's a lot more to manage in this park just than the other one, especially because it's so big compared to the other ones that we've had to this point. Now, we are getting some more coasters as far as research goes, which will allow us to do some more work here eventually as far as that goes. But for right now, we're going to try and get this log flume modified, and then we can look to some of these other spaces here for the new areas. I really see two spots as we look at here that we can really stick a big coaster without having to do too many hurdles around existing stuff. So this flume has a lot of interactivity with itself, just a lot of crossovers and everything, which I like. So we're going to keep as much of that as we can, but at the same time we need to figure out exactly where it needs to sit as far as entrance and exit goes, our station platform, and where we sit everything else. So looking at the whole thing, we're going to put the station platform right in the middle of where the old ride was. We're also going to keep that little drop right there over the water, and kind of reverse how we had some of this coming through before. So here we go, it sticks out and do the S-bend and connect it into that existing lift hill. So just trying to rebuild this while using the same bones from the thing before. There's our station platform. I think that's a better place for it. And you can see we still do start out with a little bit of a drop there to begin with. Using some tunnels, I feel like, you know, we've had tunnels before on this, so we might as well continue to use them. But I want a little more of this outside, so it's a little more easily followed. One of my big gripes about parks in general in RCT is making sure that you can follow a ride without having to keep toggling on and off underground view or hide scenery view or things like that, especially in parks that get real dense with heavy custom scenery. But thankfully we don't have to worry too much about that right now, so this should be a relatively easy one to take a look at. So we've got ourselves a lift here that gets us up towards the top right now. We have to deal with a couple of things down below, like the car ride that was in there earlier, but we can get around that by just putting in the tunnel and Then we'll lower some land here to open this whole thing up. Also extend that drop just a little bit so our max log flume drop has gotten a bit bigger than it was before. But by doing this, we've now freed up some pathway space, so we can come off of that little plaza that we had created initially and get a little bit more easy access to this quadrant of the map by coming down the mountain here. We're starting to build that pathway over top of that first drop too, so create a little bit of interaction there. And here we jump to the pathway and some queue already in as well. So our queue is fairly interactive with the ride itself, and actually helps to build out the anticipation a little bit, and helps us, I don't know, it's free theming as far as I'm concerned, once you add in some interactivity with your pathways. Now we're going to drop a lot of trees and plants here because I feel like we've been killing them all by deleting them throughout the rest of this playthrough. So we've changed the type of landscape a little bit here, do some rock, do some of the dirt and grass. I feel like dirt and grass is sort of the real MVP of land types. And then we're also going to add in some wood walls here, some of the solid wood walls, just for the fact that we're getting very close to the actual ride itself. You wouldn't want any guests to reach over into the lift hill, for example, for that flume. So we're going to put the mesh fence where we want the guests to look, and we're going to put the wood fence where we want the guests to not look or not reach. So that's part of what we're going to do here, building through the whole thing. But now we've got a whole log flume, and I think it's looking pretty good. And that's going to conclude our part 1 here. As we get into part 2, we're going to do some couple of more coaster builds and a little bit more just aesthetic upgrades as far as this whole thing goes. You know, we're looking here at where we could put the next one. This valley is kind of unsuitable for a coaster without a fair bit of modification, and you know, that's what we're going to do. So as we get to next episode, we're going to start out with a pretty exciting new coaster. So stay tuned for that, and let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks, everybody.